journalistic frauds in history began to unravel. The perpetrator was Stephen Glass, a 25-year-old rising star at the New Republic, who wrote dozens of high-profile articles for a number of national publications in which he made things up. He made up people, places, and events. He made up organizations and quotations. Sometimes he made up entire articles. And to back it all up, he created fake notes, fake voicemails, fake faxes, even a fake website. Whatever it took to deceive his editors, not to mention hundreds of thousands of readers.
My life was one very long process of lying and lying again to figure out how to cover those other lies.
Was there a progression here? Did you make up the last 6 stories, or did you...
Like a stock graph. There's going to be exceptions in this, but the general trend of the stories is that they started out with a few made-up details and quotes, and granted, few too many, of course, but few. And then they progressed into stories that were completely fabricated, just completely made up out of whole cloth.
Stephen Glass's main job was at the New Republic, a distinguished magazine with a 90-year history of publishing political and social commentary. It also has a reputation for discovering young, talented writers, and Stephen Glass seemed to be one of those. He was editor of his college newspaper at the University of Pennsylvania and joined the New Republic as an editorial assistant in 1995. Not long afterward, he was assigned to write a story on an arcane piece of Washington legislation. He thought it needed sprucing up, and a serial liar was born.
I remember thinking, if I just had the exact quote that I wanted to make it work, it would be perfect. And I wrote something on my computer, and then I looked at it, and I let it stand. And then it ran in the magazine, and I saw it, and I said to myself what I said every time these stories ran: you must stop, you must stop. But I didn't.
Why not?
I loved the electricity of people liking my stories. I loved going to story conference meetings and telling people what my story was going to be and seeing the room excited. I wanted every story to be a home run.
He had a way of hovering affably around everything. He was sweet in what turned out to be this very sinister way. He was aching to please.
Leon Wieseltier is the literary editor of the New Republic and has worked there for 20 years. He says he never suspected that Glass was making things up, but it did seem as though he had an uncanny knack for stumbling onto people and stories that seemed too good to be true. It became the trademark of a Stephen Glass story.
Everything around him turned out to be incredibly vivid, or zany, or in some other way memorable. And at the meetings, we used to wait for Steve's turn so that he could report on his next caper. We got really suckered.
And his imagination knew no bounds. There was a piece about a political memorabilia convention featuring Monica Lewinsky condoms, and one about an evangelical church that worshipped George Herbert Walker Bush. But his articles could also be vicious, taking on public figures like former presidential advisor Vernon Jordan.
I said that he had behaved lecherously towards young women, and I provided anonymous or poorly identified individuals to say that about him.
Did you not like Vernon Jordan?
I wanted a story that I thought would be the perfect story and that the readers would most enjoy to read.
How did this work, and how did you draw people into these lies?
Readers are saying.
Right.
I would tell a story, and there would be fact A, which maybe was true. And then there would be fact B, which was sort of partially true and partially fabricated. And there'd be fact C, which was more fabricated and almost no true. And there'd be fact D, which was a complete whopper and totally not true. And so people would be with me in these stories through fact A and through fact B. And so they would believe me to C. And then at D, they were still believing me through the story.
By 1998, he was earning more than $100,000 in selling fabricated stories to Rolling Stone, George, and Harper's Magazine. He was also getting his face on television. His articles always generated lots of interest and very few angry letters to the editor.
And that's because much of the time I wrote fictional stories about fictional people at fictional times doing fictional things. And those people don't write letters.
Most magazines, including the New Republic, have fact-checkers assigned to vet articles for any inaccuracies. But Stephen Glass knew how to subvert the process because he himself had been a fact-checker at the magazine.
I knew how the system worked, and I made it so that my stories could get through. I invented fake notes. I later would invent a series of voicemail boxes and business cards. I invented newsletters. I invented a website. For every lie I told in the magazine, there was a series of lies behind that lie that I told in order to get it to be published.
Consider his notes. With a polished scrawl, Glass drew diagrams of meetings that never occurred, attended by people who didn't exist, talking about events that never happened. Still, Chuck Lane, the executive editor of the New Republic from 1997 to 1999, says the magazine was ultimately accountable.
It was really the magazine's responsibility to ensure that the stuff that went in was good journalism, and it totally failed in that respect. The only thing I think that you could say in defense of the New Republic was that we were up against somebody at the time who was really determined to deceive the magazine, and that is quite unusual.
Lane, who is now a reporter for the Washington Post, says that Stephen Glass might still be duping editors if it weren't for an online version of Forbes magazine, which was trying to do a follow-up on an article Glass had written about a convention of computer hackers in Bethesda, Maryland. Specifically, a 15-year-old who had hacked into a company called Juked Micronics and then extorted tens of thousands of dollars not to do it again. The Forbes editors told Lane they were having trouble confirming a single fact.
My first move was to call in Steve, and he came into my office, and the first words out of his mouth were, "What did I do?" That seemed odd. So I told him, you got to come back to me right away with the phone number for this guy and the place to reach that guy, and we'll get in touch with all these sources.
Sure enough, Glass returned with a list of email addresses and phone numbers for everyone featured in the article.
And I started calling them, and they all turned out to be these weird voicemails, some with seemingly altered voices and stuff like that. And he gave me an email address for this supposed hacker, this 15-year-old hacker he'd made up, and I sent him an email and got weird answers back.
Glass also produced angry emails that he claimed to have received from the adolescent hacker. "I hope you rot in hell," said this one. You talked about agents for hackers, a guy named Joel Hurt. He doesn't exist either, right?
Does not exist.
The Center for Interstate Online Investigations.
Does not exist. I invented that as well.
And something called the Uniform Computer Security Act.
Does not exist.
They were real howlers, weren't they? But again, Steve presented the notes. He presented the material that supposedly backed this up.
The National Assembly of Hackers.
I called their voicemail.
Computer Insider, a
Hey, I have
newsletter.
a copy of Computer Insider right here. He gave me a copy of that newsletter.
Really?
Yeah, well, he made it up. Yeah, but he gave me a copy.
Glass called it the official publication of the National Assembly of Hackers, which doesn't exist either. But he used it to document a number of facts he had written in his story. There isn't that much going down, folks, because the big conference is coming up. He even went to the trouble to create a website.
It was ostensibly a web page from Juked Micronics, which contained this letter, sort of claiming that the New Republic had portrayed them inaccurately in their story or something like that.
I mean, was the website convincing?
No, the second I looked at it, I thought, this isn't a real corporate website. I mean, first of all, it was on AOL members. Corporations that make high-tech products in Silicon Valley don't go on AOL members.
Chuck Lane eventually demanded that Glass take him to where the big conference had been held. Making it up as he went along, Glass brought him to a complex of buildings in Bethesda, Maryland.
I'm juggling so much at this point, and I've just made so many more lies on top of what's in my story. I can't remember what's in my story.
Did you know what this building was?
I'd never been in this building in my life.
It turned out to be a poor choice.
I came in here with Chuck, and I sort of looked around at this area, and I just said, this is it, This is where the conference was. And it's like, the conference was here? I'm like, yeah, it's the conference.
It's definitely not the most likely site for a conference.
I think it's impossible to have a conference in here.
He told you that, didn't he?
Yeah, and so then I lied again. I just said, well, they set up tables around the perimeter. I just was thinking up anything I could,
And with that, the journalistic career of Stephen Glass ended. He dropped out of sight and spent much of the past 5 years in therapy, trying to start over. He's earned a law degree from Georgetown University and written a book, for which he reportedly received a 6-figure advance. This time, it's clearly labeled fiction, a novel called The Fabulist, about a young Washington reporter who's a pathological liar, etc., etc., etc.
What I did hurt the people I worked with. It hurt my editors. It hurt my family. It hurt my friends. It hurt the readers.
And several people at the New Republic told us that when this whole thing started to unravel, you literally cried on their shoulders.
Yeah.
Tears.
I'm sure I did.
And then continued to lie to them.
I'm sure I did. Yes, absolutely.
Did you ever apologize to any of them?
This is the very beginning of a very, very long process of apologies. I didn't apologize to people because I was so ashamed.
Certainly you could forgive them for perhaps being a little bit cynical about this apology since you're doing it on national television and not in person.
I don't think that's right, though, saying because I'm doing it on national television.
Well, you've got a book out, you're having to talk to any of these people for 5 years.
I didn't want to give an apology when I didn't yet understand why I had done what I had done wrong. And so I've spent 5 years coming to understand why I had behaved so terribly.
He's a worm. I have no place in my heart for him any longer.
You think it's possible he's changed?
No. I don't mean to have a hard heart, but I think, frankly, that what you're covering now is contrition as a career move. I have no reason to believe otherwise.
Glass now lives in New York City, where he hopes to be admitted to the state bar. He's passed the written exam, but there are questions about his character and his fitness to practice law.
You're very good at inventing characters and very good at inventing quotes. What I'm trying to figure out is whether you're being honest with me or, in fact, the person I'm interviewing is just another character that you've invented.
I know people are going to think that. And while I know I am not inventing the person I'm sharing with you now, I can't make you believe that. All I can do is continue to behave in a way that earns your trust.
If it was sunny outside, and Steve and I were both standing outside in the sun, and Steve came to me and said, "It's a sunny day," I would immediately go check with 2 other people to make sure it was a sunny day.